Hey guys, thanks for listening to Audio Street. I'm your host, D.O. Bester, and today we are discussing Kendrick Lamar's new album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. Before we get started, I wanted to thank everyone for listening. If you haven't already subscribed and followed this podcast to get notified whenever I upload new episodes, then please do so. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content. This is Kendrick's first album in 5 years, his last album being Damn in 2017. Damn had a lot of commercial success with physical copies as well as merch, so the numbers ended up being around 603K in the first week. This album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, is on pace to make 350K first week with no merch or physical copies at this time. So, let's get into the album. Kendrick says a lot of lines on this album that people are afraid to address, and he really pushes his own limits just to see how far he can go, and it's almost like he's laughing at the people that he's pissing off, and it's quite entertaining. And this must have been the most creative, diverse, dynamic, problematic, head-bopping album I've ever heard. This album really made me wonder how far Tupac would have gone with his lyrics had he still been alive. We can talk a lot about the controversy and comparisons, but there's a lot more here spiritually and challenging, and the little kid in me would argue that there's no comparison. Why would I question that? Pac would always be on top, but after listening to this album, the answer is clear. And there's even Tupac references on the album that I cannot overlook. The Poetic Justice reference on We Cry Together, there's a scene with Tupac and Janet Jackson when they're cussing each other out, and they do the scene perfectly on We Cry Together, and I laughed out loud when Taylor Page called Kendrick Lamar dirty. I love how they put their own spin on it. It's also interesting that R. Kelly was called out here, and the truth was told. Kendrick says that we still play his music. It's something that a lot of us cannot deny. He's done some awful things, and yet his music is still played in places all around the world. I will say I was really surprised to hear Kodak Black, as so many other people were. For some, this will be very problematic because of his past actions and insensitive comments. He even said, "What you doing with Kendrick? What you doing with the legend?" And I like that because as I heard Kodak Black start talking, I literally said, what is he doing here? And this is from the Rich interlude. This duo of Kendrick Lamar and Kodak Black was a surprise, but it still works in a few different ways. Kodak has experienced a lot of the same things and instances that Kendrick has. And even though Kodak's lyrics are sometimes questionable, they can relate on many different levels and aspects. This duo also works because Kodak raps like this with such meaning whenever he wants to. And as a listener, so we sometimes forget that rappers or artists in general say whatever they want. And it's like he had a lot building up for this interlude, and it works out really great for him. Track number 7, which I'm sure is chosen on purpose because of lucky number 7. Rich Spirit has a mocking tone that I can't help but laugh at, and if you get it, you get it. Kendrick was feeling himself, and the flow is nice, and it deserves all the head bops. Stop playing with me before I turn you into a song is a great bar that draws you into the song even more. Demons are referenced a lot on this album. This represents Kendrick going through a lot of changes since his last album in 2017. He says, "You should know that I'm slightly off, fighting off demons that been outside, better known as myself. I'm a demigod. Every thought is a creative. Sometimes I'm afraid of my open mind." This is from his track Mr. Morale. Throughout this album, it shows that he doesn't care what anyone thinks, and this album more than likely holds some of the most bold bars I've ever heard. In his latest video, in 95, he actually says on the screen through the text, "This shit hard." And not only does it mean that the beat is hard, it also means that what he's going through is hard as well. And it's really eye-opening because he's literally yelling that part out. When we ask who is Mr. Morale, it seems to be his ego. I've read that some believe it's another name for his therapist, and that could be true since he has admit on this album that he needed therapy and he was being unfaithful at certain points throughout the album. The album was definitely worth a 5-year wait, and it was a full imperfection, but it came together just full circle perfectly. I'd say the most impactful track is Mother I Sober. There's a big story there, and it's worth listening to and picking apart as well. My takeaways for the album are going to be N95, Rich Spirit, and Silent Hill. My favorite line, because I actually picked more than one, my favorite lines: some things I cannot forget. Lord knows I try my best. You said it's not my best. I came up out my flesh. Some things I must confess. And my second favorite line is water watching, live my life in nature. Only thing relieves me. Spirit guide, whisper in my ear. Tell me that she sees me. And that right there should let you know that there's a lot more spiritually within this album than what we are seeing from the outside. There's a lot more, and I really love all the hidden aspects within the videos as well, because those tell their whole story themselves. Just if you don't even listen to the audio, just looking at it visually, there's just a lot of a bigger story that we haven't seen. Overall, I give this album an A+. I cannot imagine it being better. Now, there were a few tracks that I feel like I couldn't really play all the way through, but there were so many more on the album that I enjoyed than just that 1 or 2 tracks. I would still accept the whole album and say it was an A+, because there was just so much put out, so much emotion and anger and hurt, and you can hear it all there. Thank you so much for listening to Audio Street. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this, and if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and follow. If you're here on Anchor or anywhere else, then definitely subscribe and follow. That way you can be notified every time I upload. And thank you for listening. Until next time, peace.